WADR, promoting dialogue. It's May Day in Dakar, 1 o'clock in Lagos. Good afternoon, and many thanks for staying tuned to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and online at wadr.org. Welcome to Newslink. Here are the top stories. A socio-political movement in Niger calls for diplomatic resolution in Mali and Algeria's dispute.
The use of a certain number of qualifiers and the broadcasting of affairs in Mali's internal affairs, we believe, are attitudes which do not work in favor of the search for a responsible solution to the differences.
The Fulani community in Nigeria's North Central region urges a thorough investigation into the massacre in Plateau State. Chad Republic President Pavel continues engagement with Ghanaian community as part of historic state visit to Ghana. And African Continental Trade Body AFTAC to host ministers of trade on April 14 over the imposition of U.S. tariffs.
We obviously will not be in a position to condone or support America first and everybody else last. We will pursue what is in Africa's best interests as we seek a path forward in respect of AGOA.
Details of these stories and more are coming up shortly.
Here is Augustine Coley with Newslink.
Many thanks for joining our broadcast. This edition kicks off in the Central Sahel region, where on Tuesday the M62 movement in Niger conducted a press briefing to show its support for the authorities regarding the recent incident involving Mali. The M62 urges both sides to maintain the spirit of solidarity that has consistently characterized their relations. More details in this report by Christopher Waticho.
The M62 movement began by condemning the comments and attitude of the Algerian government in the diplomatic crisis opposing it to the AES Confederation. Abdoulaye Seydou is national coordinator of the M62 movement.
The use of a certain number of qualifiers and the broadcasting of affairs in Mali's internal affairs, we believe, are attitudes which do not work in favor of the search for a responsible solution to the differences which do not oppose the two countries.
The platform, which brings together several civil society organizations in Niger, is calling for dialogue to resolve this new diplomatic crisis, which this time involves Niger and Burkina Faso. Again, Seydou says,
and today, the dynamic of the A's is the area of defense and national sovereignty, and Algeria, instead of being an obstacle to this dynamic, must support it and show solidarity with its brother Mali.
In the Nigerian capital, Niamey, as in Bamako and Ouagadougou, many voices support the position of the Confederation of Sahel States in the new diplomatic role with Algeria. However, many are hoping for calm in an already tense regional diplomatic contest.
A report by WADR's Niamey correspondent Mutala Zuberu and voiced by Christopher Waticho. Meanwhile, in Bamako, hundreds of Malians, mostly young people, led a protest against the downing of an intelligence drone belonging to the Defense and Security Forces by Algeria. The protesters gathered in front of the Algerian embassy on Tuesday as the diplomatic tension between Algiers and the AES Confederation heightens. Several associations, youth movements, and CSOs aligned with the junta led the demonstration, with, among others, aimed to pressure Algeria to tender an apology for its action. Imo Edit has the rest of the details.
Protesters who were positioned in front of the Algerian embassy chanted slogans such as "Respect our sovereignty" and "Hands of Mali's integrity." Tuesday's demonstration by the CSOs and youth groups adds to an already tense diplomatic crisis between Mali and Algeria, who have both recalled the ambassadors and closed their airspace. Algiers additionally withdrew its ambassadors in Ouagadougou and Niamey. Tension arose after a Malian reconnaissance drone was shot down during the night of March 31 to April 1, 2025, near the border with Algeria. While Bamako claims that the drone was taken down in its airspace, the Algerian Ministry of Defense in a statement disclosed that the drone was neutralized by an anti-aircraft defense system after it traveled for approximately 2 kilometers in Tinzouaten. The Malian authorities refused Algeria's account of the event, maintaining that the drone was carrying out a surveillance mission in the national territory and never violated Algerian airspace. Despite calls for de-escalation of the political tension, no bilateral dialogue has been officially announced between Bamako and Algiers.
Imo added with that report, and before leaving the Sahel, the Burkinabe government is warning against publications on social networks that glorify terrorism. A communique to this effect was issued by the Minister of Security, Mahamadou Sana. Abdullahi Hassan completes the story.
In the press release, Minister Mahamadou Sana notes the dissemination of malicious content on social networks in the form of writings, photos or videos promoting terrorism and conveying false information. The Minister of Security is referring to the latest terrorist attacks which took place in March in Zolenzo in the Bokul Dumuhun region and Japaga in the East region. According to him, the aim of these attacks is to undermine the morale of the fighting forces engaged in the reconquest of the territory and the consolidation of the liberated localities. They also aim to call into question the revolutionary momentum generated by the government and to manipulate public opinion. The memo points out that these acts constitute a threat to social peace and are punishable under Burkina Faso's penal code. Mahamadou Sana warns that these contents are already being investigated with a view to identifying and arresting the perpetrators. He then calls on Burkinabe to refrain from any act of dissemination of false information or content promoting terrorism.
Abdullahi voiced that report by our Ouagadougou correspondent, Martin Kabar.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Now, here in Senegal, the International Monetary Fund's mission to Dakar ended on Tuesday, April 8, 2025. For 2 days, an IMF delegation met with Senegalese authorities to discuss ways and means of securing new financing program to restore the country's economic stability. IMF head of mission, Bebe Selassie, spoke of constructive discussions following his meeting with President Bassirou Diomaye Faye. The two men are considering measures to overcome the economic challenges facing Senegal following recent revelations by the Court of Auditors regarding the state of public finances. Why the director of the IMF's African department has ruled out any financing plans for the time being, Senegal's Ministry of Economy has stated that these discussions will ultimately lead to the signing of a new economic and financial program. However, the Bretton Woods institution is open to further discussions and rather encourages the new Senegalese authorities' desire to restore budgetary transparency and to fight against corruption. Senegalese ministers of economy and finance are expected in Washington in the coming hours to meet with the IMF and the World Bank aimed at continuing negotiations for the new financing agreement. As a reminder, the IMF suspended its financing program for Senegal worth more than 1 trillion CFA francs since September 2024. Elsewhere in Nigeria, a coalition of Fulani associations in Plateau State in the North Central region is demanding justice and protection after what it describes as a targeted campaign of violence and vilification. The group is calling for an independent investigation into recent massacre in Bokers that left more than 80 people dead. WADR's Usma Umar reports that the Fulani community fears it has been scapegoated amid rising insecurity.
In the quiet area of Bokkos, where farming and herding have long coexisted in a fragile peace, violence struck again. More than 50 people were reportedly killed in a series of coordinated attacks on villages, leaving behind scorched homes, grieving families, and growing tension between communities. Amidst the grief, this coalition of Fulani associations in Plateau State gathered in Jos on Tuesday to raise what it described as an urgent alarm. Muhammad Garba, chairman of the coalition, and his colleagues are demanding an independent and transparent investigation into the attacks.
We call on the federal government to set an independent and unbiased panel of inquiry to investigate and probe these incidences and compensate victims appropriately without consideration for religion or ethnicity or whatever tribal sentiments. Deploy neutral security personnel to restore peace and normalcy.
Observers maintain that cycles of violence in the region are many, driven by a mix of ethnic mistrust, political manipulation, and long-standing disputes over land and grazing routes. However, as the blood dries on the soil of Bokkos, the call from the Fulani coalition echoes a familiar plea across Nigeria's conflict zones: justice, protection, and the right to belong. Human Rights Watch and other advocacy groups have previously warned that without justice and accountability, violence in Plateau and Nigeria at large will continue to spiral. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, Usman Umar reporting from Abuja.
Czech Republic President Petr Pavel continues his engagement today with the Ghanaian community as part of his historic 3-day state visit to Ghana. Pavel's visit is the first by a Czech or former Czechoslovak head of state in over 60 years. The leader of the Central European nation hopes to bolster bilateral relations and unlock new avenues for economic cooperation between the two nations. WADR's Nadidititi reports.
President Pavel, who landed in Accra on Tuesday following a 2-day stop in Mauritania, was officially received at the Jubilee House, the seat of Ghana's presidency. He later held bilateral talks with President John Dramani Mahama, where discussions focused on enhancing trade, investment and partnership in critical sectors such as energy, infrastructure, healthcare and education. During a joint press briefing, President Mahama described the recent 10% tariff imposed by the United States on Ghana and several other African nations as a move with very severe implications for the continent.
Ghana got slapped with 10%, which is the lowest in the tariffs that were rolled out. But a country like Lesotho got slapped with 46%. One of the largest contributors to Lesotho's economy is the trade and garments industry. Then you can be sure that it's going to affect a small country like Lesotho.
Meanwhile, Czech's President Petr Pavel also weighed in on the issue, calling on the United States to reconsider its trade strategy.
So, in my view, it is really unfortunate to impose such a broad wave of tariffs without negotiating.
He urged Washington to adopt a more inclusive approach through constructive dialogue with its trade partners. As part of his visit, President Pavel is expected to participate in the opening of the Ghana-Czech Business Forum aimed at boosting private sector partnerships. He will also inaugurate the Czech House, a new cultural and diplomatic hub, and commission a hospital built by a Czech firm, signaling his country's growing commitment to development projects in Ghana. For WADR, Nadidi Tete, Accra.
Meanwhile, African ministers of trade are meeting on April 14 to evaluate and propose measures to cushion the impact of the U.S. 10% baseline tariffs on imports into the American market. The African Continental Free Trade Area, after the world's largest free trade area, will host the forum in Ethiopia. Francis Boniface now reports.
Describing President Trump's decision as a wake-up call, Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area, Wamkele Mene, warns that Africa must act swiftly to reduce its dependence on external markets.
Combined with some of the trade instruments that we have introduced, as well as the overall liberalization objective of the AfCFTA, I believe that we are well positioned as a continent to turn this crisis into an opportunity.
According to the Secretariat, the tariffs could diminish the competitiveness of African goods in the U.S. market, affecting key export sectors such as textiles, agriculture, and manufacturing, among others, benefiting from the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA. The platform provides duty-free access to the U.S. for eligible African countries. Wamkele Mene emphasizes open and mutually beneficial negotiations.
We obviously will not be in a position to condone or support America first and everybody else last. That is not a partnership that is within the spirit of the MOU that we have with the United States. We will pursue what is in Africa's best interests as we seek a path forward in respect of AGOA.
As of February 2025, 48 African countries have ratified the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, including Ghana, Nigeria, and Côte d'Ivoire, slapped with the highest tariff in West Africa. Thus, the April 14 ministerial meeting will bring together policymakers, economists, and trade experts to discuss regional economic integration amid the global financial crisis. Faced with this situation, the chairperson of the African Union Commission, Mahmoud Ali Yusuf, believes in building strong ties rather than erecting trade barriers, urging the American president to reconsider his decision.
Francis Boniface reporting there. You are listening to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Here is a recap of our top stories. A socio-political movement in Niger is advocating for a diplomatic solution to the dispute between Mali and Algeria. The Fulani community in Nigeria's north-central region is demanding a comprehensive investigation into the massacre in Plateau State. Czech Republic President Pavel continues engagement with Ghanaian community as part of historic state visit to Ghana. Still ahead in the news, Liberian government refutes former Vice President Taylor's claims of non-payment of retirement benefits. We also have a press review, guest interview, and sports news. Please stay with us.
Fresh and breaking news all the time. Hear it first as the news breaks, only on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Many thanks for staying with us. As a reminder, we are streaming live on YouTube at WADR News and on Facebook, WADR English Service. Let's now take you to Liberia, where the government has counter-reacted claims by former Vice President Joe Howard Taylor of unpaid retirement benefits, among others. From Monrovia, WADR's Ibrahim Parker provides the details.
I should be getting benefits as a former vice president, which I'm not getting. That is the way the law is written. That is still an issue I've written. The speaker, the president pro tempore.
That was Joe Taylor expressing her frustration over being compensated as a former senator instead as a former vice president. She also claims not to have received an official vehicle in support to Steve since her departure from office, despite several written appeals to the current administration. But responding to the former Liberian Vice President, Information Minister Pia confirmed that Taylor is currently benefiting from 2 pension schemes.
We first want to start with some past presidents and vice presidents have continued to receive retirement pension benefits under the old non-contributory system. And so the former vice president receives a monthly retirement pension benefit from the National Social Security Corporation.
According to the minister, certain details of former office holders are kept confidential for privacy reasons. Although the Liberian government denies former Vice President Joel Howard Taylor's claims regarding her retirement benefits, the situation remains complex. Observers are calling for an open investigation into the matter. For Newslink on WADR, I'm Abraham Parker reporting from Monrovia.
This is the newspaper review. Stay abreast and find out what the top stories are in your country.
This is the newspaper review.
The newspaper review.
Let's join Sankule Janko for a review of local dailies in the Gambia.
Let's begin with the Standard newspaper for today. And the lead story on the Standard newspaper reads, Government explains demolition
at Salaji. Recently, you've seen heavy machines demolishing houses at Salaji, a very popular settlement, known for bourgeoisie Gambians, if you like it. But the government demolished a lot of houses, claiming that those houses were built on government lands. That leads me to the next story, because Edward Francis Small, Center for Rights and Justice, urged the Salaji demolition victims to consider taking legal action against the government. This other story reads, Korea not free of torture charges, because this is where Michael Sankoria's trial began in the US on Monday. He faces 6 counts of torture and crimes to commit torture as well. Currently, he's undergoing trial in Denver, USA. Cancelo convicted for assault. That is another story. Now let's move on to the Point newspaper. And the lead story on the Point newspaper reads, George denies prosecution's lead bid to call Kabla in alleged PIU shooting. If you're aware, Usman Bojang is currently going trial. He's alleged to have shot 3 police officers, 2 of whom actually died. The trial is ongoing, but apparently the prosecution's bid to call on the Kabla has been denied by the sitting judge. On the last newspaper for today, and that is the Fourier newspaper. And the lead story on the Fourier newspaper reads, Basse Area Council Chair reveals $24 million he inherited. And the final story for today reads, Police probing suspected suicide in Casa Kunde. I'm afraid these are the major stories making headlines on Gambian dailies. It's back to you in the studio.
Sankule Janko there with the press review.
Politics, analysis on major news, social matters, and all. This is The Guest.
The guest interview segment this afternoon focuses on the African Ministers of Trade meeting scheduled for April 14 to evaluate and propose measures to mitigate the impact of the U.S. 10% baseline tariffs on imports into the American market. Our guest is Evans Nunu, a Ghanaian economist who provides economic analysis about the importance of the pending meeting.
As a continent, we are supposed to have that common forum for trade. And I have been saying that America under Trump doesn't seem to respect treaties and agreements, because most African countries have agreement with America by way of AGWA, that is Africa Growth and Opportunity Agreement. By that agreement, some selected African countries that are having good democracies are supposed to export their commodities to America without any serious hitches. And that has been an agreement. It was renewed last year. In September, it would expire. We have to go and have a review. Trump did not respect this agreement. He just hit us with 10% tariffs. So I think that the meeting is a step in the right direction.
Of course, step in the right direction. In that case, considering the implications of the U.S. decision, what should be the focus of this meeting of the trade ministers?
Yes, their meeting should be on how to get better markets, more friendly markets for our exports. And I would recommend that we strengthen the Africa free trade area itself so that we can trade among ourselves. If we do that, demand for our export will go up and we can have better terms of trade. And also, we have to look at ways of improving upon our exports. The focus must also be on how to switch from this export of raw materials to improved commodities. If it is cocoa, we can add a touch to it. I mean, we can send the butter or whatever it is so that we can get actual good value for our export. And more so, if we're able to improve upon the quality of our export, we are likely to have people develop that strong preference for our export, and that will give us some inelastic demand for our commodities.
And talking about AFTA, does it have the capacity to negotiate trade agreements on behalf of Africa and improve, regional trade like the EU does for all European countries?
Africa has more than what it takes to negotiate for better trading conditions. Look, if it's about one country, then you may be weak. But if it's the whole of Africa coming together to negotiate, trust me, we have the trade muscle to have good conditions for ourselves. So I think that Africa as a continent has more than what it takes to have better negotiations this time around.
There have been similar meetings of regional leaders to address challenges of regional trade in Africa, yet the impact of those discussions have not been felt. What difference will this meeting make in addressing the situation?
Okay, so the strategy of the West has been that when Africa decides, they also come in with a way to disintegrate the decision. For example, this AGWA, this agreement with US, obviously, they selected some countries and give them better and more favorable trade conditions. In that regard, countries like Ghana and those that benefited might not be too much thinking about how to trade across Africa, because obviously they have better conditions and they stand to get more foreign exchange into their countries by way of trade. So I think that this time around, America will not come in with the divide and rule tactics. And if that is so, then I'm sure this time around, Africa can unite and take decisions that would benefit the continent as a whole, but not individual countries.
Evans Nuno is a Ghanaian economist. And now Sankule Janko arrives in studio with the latest sports news. Good afternoon, Sankule.
Good afternoon, Augustine.
Well, so far we've seen some interesting results from the UEFA Champions League, but let's begin with the CAF Champions League. What's happening?
Right, and because of that, we'll have to begin with, of course, the best in the CAF Champions League, because Al Ahly secured their place in the semi-finals of the CAF Champions League after completing a double over Al Hilal of Sudan with a 1-0 second leg win on Tuesday evening. Having already won the first leg by the same scoreline, in Cairo, the defending champions delivered another disciplined performance away from home to seal the victory by 2-0 aggregate. Meanwhile, South Africa's Mamelodi Sundowns will meet defending champions, that is Al Ahly. They've also won against Esperance Tunis. In the other CAF Champions League quarter-final match, Pyramids FC made history on Tuesday night by qualifying for the first time ever in the Champions League final, that is the CAF Champions League semi-finals. The Egyptians signed Morocco's FAR Rabat despite 2-0 defeat in the second leg, but they won 4-3 on aggregate. Pyramid will now face the winner of the other quarter-final match between Orlando Pirates and MC Alger, that is tonight. But interestingly, elsewhere in the UEFA Champions League, Arsenal produced the shocking results of the night after thrashing holders Real Madrid 3-0 at home. Declan Rice was the hero as he scored two brilliant free kicks before Moreno added the third. Inter Milan beat Bayern 2-1 away, and tonight we have some games.
Yes, what are they?
Yes, the games tonight, of course, is Barcelona will take on Borussia Dortmund, and Aston Villa of England will take on Paris Saint-Germain tonight.
Interesting, but quickly, Sankule, what do you make of the current condition of Real Madrid and that of Bayern Munich? Looking at the history in the Champions League and at this stage.
Of course, they are very good. In fact, they're one of the best in the competition because, as you know, Real Madrid are the record winners. They've won this competition more than any other team. And Bayern also is one of the teams that have done so well in the UEFA Champions League. But Real Madrid, for a lot of, neutrals, they would say justice was finally delivered because so many people feel that Real Madrid have been winning games that they don't deserve. But against Arsenal were the deserved winners. They played well and they scored. The scoreline just matched their performance. And for Bayern Munich, it was a disappointing result for them because Inter Milan came to Allianz Arena and defeated them 2-1. And it is highly unlikely that Bayern will overturn the results because Italian teams are known for defending. And inside San Siro in Italy, well, it's possible. It's football. Nothing is impossible. But it will be very difficult for Bayern Munich to get the results, inside San Siro.
We keep following for tonight's encounter. Thank you, Sankule. And that concludes this edition of Newslink here on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and a special thanks to Mustafa Sek and Umudanyogo for the technical support. Feel free to connect with us on our social media platforms, X, Instagram at WADR English, and on Facebook, WADR English Service. Also listen live at wadr.org. Stay tuned for our gender program in English, 50-50, Bana Didititi, coming up at the bottom of the hour at 1 p.m. The comprehensive news in French, which is M4 Chevu, will come your way with Mustafa Jakite. I am Augustine Curley. Good afternoon.
And many thanks to you for listening to News